Welcome back to another My Hero Academia anime vs manga video breaking down season 7 episode 17 titled Hopes, sharing the same title as chapter 379. The episode begins with us going back in time to the central hospital just after Kurogiri had awakened and left. In an added scene, the heroes and doctors are getting all of the wounded from both sides of the war inside of the hospital. The doctor, who is an obvious reference to Super Mario, tells Lady Nagant that her being up and walking will open up her wounds and could possibly be fatal. Nagant doesn't care and wants to know where the enemy is. The doctor refuses to tell her anything as she is an escaped convict. Nagant says that Deku himself told her to fight alongside him. Rocklock tells the doctor to let her go and that he will take responsibility. He then hands Nagant a device that will keep her up to date on UA's location, the enemy's positions, and so on. Rocklock tells her that ultimately this war hinged on their faith in Izuku Midoriya, so if her heart is telling her to take action for Deku, then he is going to trust her. Back to the present on the roof, Nagant's wounds open up. She tells herself that she still has one more shot left in her and every shot counts. She takes note of the gray skies and how she had been stained by darkness and lost faith in the light until Deku and Hawks came around to remind her of how she felt back then with her bright and shining hopes and her reason for being a hero. We then see Nagant's eyes glimmer as her heroic heart fully returns and she shoots her last bullet. Nagant here continues the theme of villains becoming heroes, and back at UA, Shigaraki, after having his hand shot off last episode, quickly tries to use his other hand to try and decay all of UA, but that hand also gets shot off by Nagant's final bullet. Deku, with hope in his eyes, understood Nagant's message that she is now fighting alongside him. Now, the anime after this does change a few things, as it's shown that Deku charges at Shigaraki using Black Whip to get a hold of Shigaraki's wrists, and Deku then throws the both of them off of UA, stating that with Shigaraki now having access to all of his quirks, he couldn't afford to keep fighting him on top of the tomb. In the manga, we never actually see Deku throwing Shigaraki and himself off of UA, though it is implied with Deku stating that he couldn't afford to fight Shigaraki on the tomb, which this change does lead to the entire scene of Shigaraki liberating himself from All For One happen on their way down to the ground instead of on top of UA, meaning that the panels showing Shigaraki still standing next to Kurogiri as All For One tells him to warp them is changed in the anime, with Shigaraki's body no longer being in those shots. Now, within Shigaraki's body, All For One, struggling to contain Shigaraki, rages, calling Nagant worthless trash after she had murdered her fellow heroes in the past, and claims now she's playing the victim like some noble agent of justice. The anime even adds a shot of Nagant lying on the ground as he says this. He calls her a pathetic pushover, switching sides to whichever the wind blows. Shigaraki laughs as a multitude of hands begins to come out of All For One's mouth. Shigaraki mocks All For One for his plan of manipulating Nagant's emotions and her past not working, and this is what he deserves for sticking his hands where they don't belong. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata begins playing in the background that later does remixes combining both Moonlight Sonata and the Uncontrollable Evil OST, as Shigaraki states the same goes for the way All For One had groomed him, using Shimura and All Might to push his buttons. The anime here adding a young Tenko Shimura with Nana Shimura and All Might standing with their backs turned to Tenko. All For One using Shigaraki's hatred for Shimura and All Might so he can move ahead with his plot to hijack his body and soul and make use of Shigaraki's burning rage to take One For All for himself. Shigaraki became a part of All For One, but he caught on to his schemes and hid the core of his essence deep down inside of his soul. Bit by bit, without All For One noticing, Shigaraki started reclaiming his body from the inside out, helping his origin follow that path. His origin being Tenko making his way out of the hands. All For One desperately shouts for Kurogiri to warp him to the real All For One, as he is no longer in control over Shigaraki's body. This completely messes with Kurogiri as he doesn't know what to do, and Shirakumo resurfaces and thinks of his friends. Shigaraki states he has no need for One for All and makes fun of All for One for thinking he had everything under control. He tells All for One that unlike Nagant and Gentle, his heart won't waver as everything he witnessed in the world led to the existence of the house his father built. Shigaraki from within bursts out of All for One's mouth, tearing him apart, and states that as Shigaraki and Tenko Shimura, he only has one hope. Out of the Vestige realm, Shigaraki, falling from the sky with a smile on his face, says the destruction of everything connected to that house, that being his origin. He tells Deku that the destruction of everything is the only thing that's going to save him. Gentle sees Deku as he falls off the side of UA with Shigaraki. The two land on the ground and Deku tells Shigaraki that he can't let him destroy everything, but he still can't pretend that he didn't see Tenko crying inside of him as the two prepare to fight. Back to Gentle as he is pushed to his limits and struggling to hold up UA. LaBrava tries to upload the new program to keep UA in the air. Gentle wonders if Deku leaving UA meant that he had faith in him. He doubts that Deku even knew that he was there, coming to the realization that with no cameras or an audience, no one would know of his participation in the war, earning him neither cheers or recognition. But he has earned the joy of being alive and present in his heart. Gentle looks up to see the business course students recording his actions, and to say the least, Gentle locks in. He tells them to get inside as it's too dangerous and they refuse, as for them documenting this war is how they will reforge the connection between heroes and society. LaBrava then hacks into their phones and begins streaming Gentle heroically holding up UA, as despite Gentle having already made peace with no one seeing him in action, LaBrava wants the world to see Gentle be a hero. The anime only showing LaBrava go live through the software, while in the manga we see LaBrava broadcast the feed to many websites including YouTube, the MHA counterpart to YouTube. UA finally regains its flight control, lightening the load for Gentle. The Twice clones flood the outside of UA, as for them every last hero has to die. Shirakumo, struggling internally, wonders who is he the protector of, and sees that the Twice clones have thrown both Aizawa and Present Mike off of UA and are plummeting to their deaths. Kaminari gets an added scene of him releasing electricity as he watches his teachers fall. Shirakumo opens up a warp gate, saving his old friends, and Kaminari is confused as this villain went out of his way to save his teachers. Mandalay believes that Kurogiri most likely was just moving Eraser from the playing field, and all they can do now is keep fighting and have faith in Deku being victorious. Deku begins running at Shigaraki as he breaks loose from Black Whip. The anime here removing the detail of the business course students, zooming in on Deku and Shigaraki from above, capturing Deku rushing towards Shigaraki. Switching back over to Gunga and All for One flying towards Shigaraki, states he originally planned for Shigaraki to become All for One in his entirety. Melding minds with Shigaraki to create a whole new identity altogether was never actually what he sought out to do. Shigaraki's impulse for destruction overshadowed all of All for One's hopes. So now that All for One's body is done for, he will forcibly give Shigaraki his quirk factor, thus broadening his authority over Shigaraki's body. His role is to complete the Demon Lord now. Hawks refuses to let All for One succeed in his mission, throws his vibro sword at All for One, causing All for One to face him. Hawks catches the sword and attempts to impale All for One with it, which this entire moment is done completely differently in the manga, and I will say the choreography was just way better, as in the manga, Hawks actually catches up to All for One and swings at All for One with his vibro sword, and does this really cool move where he feints a sword swing, pretending to swing his sword at All for One, making All for One dodge. But the vibro sword was actually never in Hawks' hand, and instead his feathers swing the sword right after his feint. All for One still manages to dodge the feint, but as he dodges the vibro sword right after, Hawks takes out the broken vibro sword and simultaneously attacks All for One. For me, manga Hawks just has more skill than his anime counterpart. Continuing on, Hawks thinks about how the future for the kids are on the line and how he needs to win so that they can have a future so bright they can't help but smile. All for One smiles, stating the wind seems to blow his way, and uses a spatial distortion quirk similar to the high-end tie-in from the PLF War arc, tearing Hawks into pieces right in front of Tokoyami. Unfortunately for All For One, the Hawks he thought he killed was an illusion conjured up by Kami, which leaves Tokoyami utterly flabbergasted. Here we get the surprise return of Kami, Seiji, and Inasa from the Shiketsu High hero course. Also, I will say the anime does change Kami's dialogue from the manga a bit, as in the manga she uses a lot of modern slang like no cap, simping, and lit, which I'm glad that it was changed because those terms can really date something like My Hero Academia. Like, imagine Kami had came up and was like, yo, All For One, you must be off the galaxy gas cause you tweaking for real. Don't get me wrong, it would be funny like how it is in the manga, but it would date the series heavily. Seiji, saving Hawks, reveals that his father had died during the Tartarus prison break about a month ago, and will take up his father's mantle in protecting those who need it. The Shiketsu High students and the heroes fight back, hitting All For One and the Twice clones with ranged attacks and keeping All For One from reaching Shigaraki. A Twice clone flies straight at All For One, with him catching Twice and trying to steal Twice's quirk. He finds out that he can only steal a quirk by touching the true body, aka the original. All For One, no longer holding back, fuses even more quirks, creating a giant ball of energy that pushes the heroes back. All For One states that even this late in the game, they still think they will win this fight, even without Endeavor, the one man who can stand up to him. As we see, Endeavor is still having Dabi follow him away from the other heroes. All For One tells the heroes that they aren't brave, they are just ignorant of his golden age. They were a generation that from a young age witnessed All Might's rise, and the generation that followed only ever knowing a world where All Might had reigned supreme as the symbol of peace. They are all ignorant of the era when everyone trembled in fear of something imperceptible, lurking unseen in the dark. A time when all were tainted by suspicion, resentment, exploitation, and prejudice during All For One's golden age. Here we see the fifth user of One For All standing on rubble and destroyed buildings during All For One's golden age. All For One is then surrounded by Inasa's wind. Inasa tells All For One that they know all about those dark times in contemporary history class, though they have never heard of All For One. Inasa having already decided to root for Endeavor and Shoto, since their hot-blooded passion will be All For One's fear and win the day. All For One, being hit with ranged attacks from within the wind, decides that it's time to steal a few quirks. He shoots out black tendrils all over, hitting Inasa in the head. Inasa tells All For One that he wants to see a future built by the guys he's cheering on. Hawks thinks of Endeavor when hearing Inasa's words, stating that it isn't just One For All being a power that linked people's hearts, but Endeavor had also done his job in paying it forward too, in linking more people together. All For One, seeing the heroes fight, can't stand seeing the look in their eyes, looking past him, having lost none of the light that keeps them going. All For One yells out that they fear coming close to him in fear of losing their quirks, and they will all meet their fate. All of a sudden, a gigantic dark shadow appears behind All For One. All For One turns around and feels that same sensation of fear and the need to dodge an attack at all costs. Tokoyami staring menacingly at the villain. Dark Shadow and Tokoyami tell All For One that even darkness comes in a range of shades, so he doesn't get to speak of the dark. We see flashbacks of a baby Dark Shadow and Tokoyami lying in bed, and the time Deku was welcomed back to UA. They continue saying the muddied, dismal darkness All For One brought about has already been devoured whole by the two of them. Tokoyami explains that the sudden storm kept them from the daylight, extending the time limit of his powers. The flames from Dabi shrunk thanks to Inasa's windstorm. The second Shiketsu showed up, he began prepping his attack, asking Pixie Bob to envelop him with her earth so that he could amass darkness. Receiving a tailwind assisted boost from Inasa, Tokoyami tells All For One that All Might told him that he couldn't steal Endeavor's quirk by simply grasping his flames, so this is why he was chosen to support Hawks and Endeavor. Tokoyami then unleashes his Dark Shadow total release. Hawks, seeing his pupil go beyond plus ultra, says to himself that if he was able to pay it forward to Tokoyami, even just a little, then him dirtying his wings was well worth it. This of course referencing Hawks being exposed to Tokoyami for killing Twice, and Tokoyami telling Hawks that his wings weren't dirty after Dabi told him the truth. All For One is then hit by abyssal black body light of Balder. Then after the credits, we get a post-credits scene showing that minutes earlier when the Twice clones had came through the warp gate, both All For One and Hawks came to the realization that the Twice situation wasn't yet the best or worst that it could have been, as we see the Twice clones creating clones of Dabi, Shigaraki, and All For One. But neither of those clones aren't capable of using their respective quirks. Based on what they know, doubles made from the original Twice were capable of using their quirks. Toga, on the other hand, when transformed, can only use a person's quirk if she loves them. We get an added shot of Toga surrounded by All For One and the League's strongest, as Froppy realizes that Toga's own restriction with her quirk applies to the doubles she creates after transforming into Twice, meaning that her love doesn't extend to Shigaraki and the others, and is why those doubles aren't capable of using their quirks. So they have to find Toga, because a single change in emotion could override that restriction at any point. The episode then ends with Toga having a mental breakdown, saying to herself that she loves Tomura and Toya, but unlike Twice and Ochakos, their quirks aren't working. Even though she loves them, their quirks don't work, and even though Twice's quirk works, for her, she can't fully become him in the same way his doubles were able to become them. Now, this episode covered about 3.5 chapters, them being chapters 379, 380, 381, and the first few pages of 382. The episode overall was fantastic, and I can't wait for the next episode. Let me know your thoughts on the episode. Did they cook with the changes? Let me know everything in the comment section below. With that said, if you enjoyed the video, then be sure to Detroit smash that like button, and if you are new to the Kiroroki channel, then be sure to subscribe to the channel with notifications on so that you don't miss any My Hero Academia Season 7 breakdowns. With that said, I'll see you all in the next one.